am delighted as Mayor of Mid and East Antrim to welcome you all tonight to this inaugural Princess Victoria Memorial Lecture in the surroundings of this splendid museum. And I'm looking forward to the exhibition tomorrow. Only a couple of weeks ago I launched an exhibition by the children of Rodensvale School, and that was a grand day as well, so I hope tomorrow will be as well. And this year marks the 70th year, as you will know, the anniversary of the Princess Victoria disaster, and the passage of time has not dimmed that sense of loss which is felt by our community and the community of Dumfries and Galloway, where my brother lives. Last Wednesday we had a splendid service in First Presbyterian Church in Larne. Nice to see you here, Padre. And yesterday we had a remembrance service in St Anne's Cathedral, and I thank my colleagues Alderman Geraldine Mulvana and Councillor Robert Logan for coming to that. That was a great service, I have to say. The loss of the MV Princess Victoria was visually brought to mind on that afternoon 70 years ago, when you could imagine the empty berth where she would have been sitting and preparing for her return journey to Stranraer. But on that day it was no ordinary day. It was a day of truly terrible and fearsome storms, and as a former RAF pilot I've encountered some serious weather in my day, but not anything like that. I wouldn't want to have been involved in that sort of weather at all. And that is a day, as Peter describes in his book, where terror came by sea. It was a day which would change the lives of many in different parts of the British Isles and the coast of Western Europe, on land and on the sea. There's nothing so stark a reminder of lives that have gone than a gravestone in a cemetery. Tonight we will hear of some of those stones and the stories that they tell about those individuals. I'm pleased tonight to be asked to launch Peter McCabe's book, which will be an enthralling guide and reminder to the tragic events of 70 years ago. Peter McCabe, of course, some of you may not know, but he is a well-known tour guide. He's based in Belfast. He looks after the childhood home of one of my heroes, George Best, and also he works for Collinswater Community Greenway and the Titanic Distilleries. Peter has also written a number of books about local cemeteries, focusing on the stories of local people buried throughout Northern Ireland, of which this book is the latest. He's a member of the Northern Ireland Tour Guide Association and History Hub Ulster. Peter has a long-standing interest in the Princess Victoria disaster, with his latest book featuring the final resting place of 70 of the victims 70 years after those events. Although he's not covering all of those tonight, I think, Peter, you'll be covering about 20 or so of those. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Peter to Larne, to the museum here, and to speak to us tonight. And I know I will join with you in wishing him well with his book, which of course will be on sale on the way out, and you'll not be allowed to go out unless you buy a copy. But I am delighted that we are joined by others outside the museum as we are live streaming this talk tonight, and I thank you for joining us wherever you are. So on that note, sir, I will hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks to the Mayor for those kind words. Thanks very much for coming along tonight. Before I start, a few thanks to say. So, but before I do that, so you can see from the screen it says stories in the stones. That's something that David has come up with. So, if you, with your permission, David, I'll maybe use that in future presentations and books. So it's 70 years, as we know, tomorrow since the disaster. So I'm going to talk tonight just about a selection of the 20 headstones that feature in the book. So the book contains 70 headstones on the 70th, sorry, the final resting places of 70 victims on the 70th anniversary. So I've tried, whilst I'm conscious that I am in Larne, I've try to make it as, what interested me in the Princess Victoria particularly was the kind of the regional spread of victims. So I'll be trying to give you a flavour of some of the far-flung venues where victims are buried. So I'm from Dundonald. It doesn't make me a bad person, but one of the things that I was surprised about was that I think there's about 11 victims buried in Dundonald. So I'll mention Larne first, of course, realising where I am, but then I'll let the subsequent ones will be further away, and the 20th one will be in Enniskillen. So that's over 100 miles away from here. So as I mentioned, a few thanks. Oh, sorry, I'll not be doing any detail of the actual sinking, because a lot of you guys will know it much better than I. But I'll be talking about the headstones of 20 of the 70 victims. So a few thanks before I start. Thanks to David particularly and Marion for facilitating this talk. And I think it's the first time I've ever given a lecture. So as if I wasn't nervous enough, he sets it up as the inaugural Princess Victoria lecture. So anybody who's expecting a lecture, I think there's the exit. So it'll be more a chat, yes, a bit of stuff and nonsense. So with respect. So a few people to thank. Is Ricky Cole here? You didn't make it? I'll not thank him then. No, I'll thank Ricky Cole and Nigel Henderson for providing a lot of the photographs initially. That's kind of sparked my interest in finding further victims. And also special thanks to Thomas and Clive for their help with the book. So this is the book. It's called Where Terror Came by Sea, and those are just a selection of the headstones on the back. So Clive proofreads them, proofreads my books, and I will be shamelessly plugging my other books after the talk. You would expect nothing less, Andrew. But and then Thomas, he pulls it all together. I don't know quite how he does it, but he does it. So this one was a real kind of it was an uber short deadline. So thanks, Thomas, for your long suffering, your forbearance. And I have to thank Stephen Cameron. So Stephen Cameron isn't here tonight, as far as I know. But if you're looking for a fantastic book, this would be the first book launch you've maybe gone to where somebody plugs somebody else's book, because it's much better than the book launch that you're at. This is Stephen Cameron's. It's described as a definitive work on the Princess Victoria disaster. It's called Death in the North Channel: The Loss of the Princess Victoria, January 1953, by Stephen Cameron. If you haven't got this book or any of Stephen Cameron's books, I would thoroughly recommend them all. He's a fantastic author. So some of the information that I've got in my book is from Stephen, from this Death in the North Channel book. So that's the thank yous out of the way. So I'm just going to rattle through 20 of the fatalities. Well, before I do then, the first little image I'll show you is Stephen Cameron's book, Death in the North Channel. And this is the front cover of my book, Where Terror Came by Sea. So the image on the front of it is of a life raft floating on the sea, and it says below it, it says it's floating there alone, a day or two after the disaster. So that's the front cover, and so the title is Where Terror Came by Sea. That came from a newspaper clipping, and there's the headline there, Where Terror Came by Sea, across the top. And you can see it doesn't actually relate to an incident in Northern Ireland, but I think that's in Holland, where you can see this boat has overturned in the dock itself. So it just shows you some idea of the scale of the gale that occurred when the Princess Victoria set sail. So again, I'm not going to talk about the whys and wheres and the problems with the Princess Victoria. I'm just going to focus on 20 of the victims and their final resting places. So as I go, starting from Larne, the centre of the universe, and then working outwards. sorry, that's the image on the back cover. So it says, "A silent witness floats empty from the disaster scene." So this is the first one in Larne. Many folks might be familiar with this, the Baxter grave. So this is in Larne. I was calling it Greenland Cemetery, but then I was told, no, you're in Larne now. You just call it the Town Cemetery. So this is in Larne, the Town Cemetery in Larne. And you can see here it's in memory of Roseanne, beloved daughter of Robert and Jeannie Baxter, who lost her life in the MV Princess Victoria disaster, as we all know, 31st of January 1953. So this is Roseanne here. And she was a 39-year-old stewardess from the town. She'd been a wren during World War II before starting working on the cross-channel service, initially with the Princess Margaret. She was last seen on the ship's deck holding a baby in her arms. Her death notices included insertions from the officers and members of Chain Memorial Women's LOL, number 33, of which her sister Jean was their highly esteemed secretary. The first and the last dart club in Larne, and you're going to have to help me out, Robert, here. The Larne and District Ornithological Birdwatchers Society, of which her father Robert was an esteemed member, and also another notice from the members of the ETU Larne branch. So this is an image of Roseanne's funeral. Is it going up in the Roddens? Yeah. So not too far from here. Yeah, just across the way. So it's basically the other. Is it the other corner from here?
We're on the corner, same corner.
Aye, same corner, other side. Yeah. So that's very.
Those houses are gone now.
Yeah. And where that has been replaced. There's like hoarding there, and amongst the events that commemorated there is the Princess Victoria disaster, kind of there. I suppose that would be. So that's Roseanne Baxter. The next one then, I have to thank Andrew McCabe for this photograph. So we were at a football match recently, and he mentioned that he'd spotted this one. So I didn't. I'd never heard of it. So he immediately sent it through to me. So this is the Mary Davis Close, and her body sadly was never recovered, but she's commemorated on this on a headstone as Mary Davis Close, aged 46 years, lost at sea, 31st January 1953. So it doesn't say. What I'll try to get over in this chat is just an idea of the variation, and some of the graves are unmarked, which is very, very sad. I would dearly love that some way we could mark all of the graves. Some of them, as like Roseanne Baxter's, quite clearly says how she perished, but this one for Mary Davis Close, it just mentions she was lost at sea. No mention of the Princess Victoria. So her body was never recovered. She was 46-year-old, and like me, I wish. She lived at Bay Park in Larne. She was a bureau assistant on the ship. So she was last seen helping the children off the ship into one of the lifeboats. But as folks here will know, all the women and children were lost, as the lifeboats that had the women and children all overturned. So there's no women and children survivors out of the 44 survivors. Mary's body was never recovered, but she's commemorated on a memorial plaque in Gardenmore Presbyterian Church. So I'm not sure if either of the ministers, or you haven't got keys? No. So right next door. So if you'd have a wee word with your colleague next door, I would love to see that plaque. I'm not sure if it commemorates just Mary or a number of the members of the congregation. And she commemorated on the headstone as lost at sea, 31st January 1953. And also her sister, Mary Kathleen Close, she also died in January 1975, aged 58. So again, that's in Larne Town Cemetery. This is also in Larne Town Cemetery. This grave here, McCarroll, it mentions on the headstone that he drowned the Princess Victoria. This is a guy called Andrew McMurtry, and this is his final resting place here. So all there is on the headstone, on the grave, sorry, are these flowers and a little vase. I think it just says McMurdy across there. So again, you wouldn't know that he had died as a result of the Princess Victoria disaster. This is him here, Andrew. He's married to Annie with one son. He was aged 56 years old, and he lived at 3 Drummond Street in the town. He was a ship's carpenter on the Princess Margaret, and he was travelling home for weekend leave. So he wasn't a staff member for the Princess Victoria, but he did work for the Princess Line. After service in the Great War, McMurdy had spent most of his working life at sea. When Princess Victoria got into trouble, he had assisted the crew in their failed attempt to close the breached stern doors, and he collapsed as a result of his efforts onto the car deck before he was assisted back to the ship's lounge. Funeral notices included from the Worshipful Master, Wardens and Brethren, St Patrick's Union, Masonic Lodge 175, Relu, and the members of the Larne Branch British Legion, as well as members of the 12th Battalion RIR OCA, the Royal Irish Rifles Old Contemptibles Association. So that's the third one. Still in Larne Town Cemetery is Mr. Ritchie with us? Are you Andrew's dad?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Tell your son that next time I come down to Larne, he could at least come along to come and talk. I know he was supposed to. So this is the final resting place of Robert John Holden Ritchie. And so thanks to yourself for I rang Andrew and I said, I'm having a bit of trouble finding this grave. And he said, well, just look, you had told him, just look for a Celtic cross. So there's the Celtic, there's not too many Celtic crosses in the cemetery, so it was relatively easy to find. But what did confuse me was he's commemorated on the side panel here, and you can see he's commemorated as Robert John Holden Ritchie, died 31st January 1953, result of the MV Princess Victoria disaster. This is Robert here. He lived at 22 Newington Avenue in Larne. So there was an article in the Sunday Life yesterday about the Princess Victoria disaster, but there's also an article about some guy that lived in Newington Avenue. So I don't think it's, I think Newington Avenue in those days was a bit better than it perhaps is now. No offence to anybody who's from Newington Avenue. Don't forget I'm from Belfast, so who am I to talk? So he was a butcher by trade, and he served his apprenticeship at Tom Graham's Butchers in the town. He'd been working in England and was returning home to Larne. His body was recovered by the SS Clonlee off Douglas Head, the Isle of Man, 5 days after the disaster. He was a member of the Orange Order and was a very keen lambeg drummer, also interested in pigeon racing. A family announcement in the local newspapers in the weeks following the disaster recorded Robert as Robert John Holden Ritchie missing, deeply mourned by his sorrowing mother and brother. So there's 22 Newington Avenue, in the photograph as well. So the book includes the homes of a number of the victims. Is that the photograph you have? Andrew said that you had a, yep. So this is the next one. This is now out in the big bad world beyond Larne. This is at Knockbreda Cemetery. For those who would maybe be master shoppers, and there's at least 2 master shoppers in the back row there. It's near Forestside in Belfast, and this is a family that perished. You can see their family that perished. So, and this is all that is Yvonne here? No, Yvonne Lascelles was to attend tonight. But these are relations of Yvonne's. So this is the Moore family, and you can see they're pictured there. So Hubert, Martha, and 8-year-old Victor, they lived at 62 London Street in Belfast, and they all died during the disaster. Hubert and Martha both worked at Short Brothers in Harland at their Wig Bay factory, and that's where the two had first met following the death of Martha's first husband. The family were travelling home to Richardson Street in East Belfast off the Ravenhill Road at the time of their deaths. Martha's father had originally came to Northern Ireland, ironically, to work as a coast guard. So those are that is Hubert, that's Martha, and that's 8-year-old Victor. Sadly, Victor's body was never recovered. So the other 2 bodies were recovered, but not Victor's. And This is 62 Richardson Street. No, sorry, that's not right. It's 62 London Road, sorry. So the next one then, this is some of the documentation relating to the moors. So, well, it says that Hubert was 9 there, but that's just a court ruling to say that even though his body was never recovered, he's declared dead. And similarly, and then a register of corrected entry. So this gives you some details of the bodies of Hubert or Martha and where they were found. Quite hard to read. This is also in Knockbreda Cemetery near Forestside, and the reason why I put it in this, it's unusual in that this commemorates William Nassau Parker, but he's commemorated on 2 headstones. So this is one of the 2. And Willie, as he was known, was a fitter, and like so many of his male fatalities, he was employed at the Wig Bay aircraft factory, short in Harlands. He was married to Elizabeth, known as Lily, and was living at Ava Gardens off the Ormo Road. And the headstone also commemorates his mother Nan and father George, who had both predeceased him. William is commemorated on the headstone as their son, William Nassau Parker, lost Princess Victoria disaster 31st January 1953. But he's also in Lisburn Cemetery. He's also commemorated on a separate headstone. So he's buried, I think, in Knockbreda, but he's commemorated on this, where he's buried along with his mum and dad. But this is his wife, and so he's not buried with her, but he is commemorated on the headstone. You can see William Nassau Parker, his date of birth, his date of death, 31st January 1953, lost Princess Victoria. So, and it says at the base, peace is theirs, memories are mine. So that's unusual because he's commemorated in two venues, not particularly 2 graveyards, even not close to each other. The next one then is, so tomorrow, Robert Kelly, this is Robert Kelly. Robert Kelly's son is coming over for the commemoration. So he lives in England now, but this is his father. So this is the first one I'll talk about in Belfast City Cemetery. It's very hard to read on the headstone. But Robert was known as Bobby. He was a 46-year-old married man and a fitter by trade, also working for Short Brothers in Harlan at their Wig Bay factory. He'd been there for about a year. He was living at 47 Wallesley Park in Belfast at the time of his death. He was a member of Eglinton Presbyterian Church, a past master of White Abbey Masonic 512, and a member of the Craigavon Masonic Lodge number 550. Craigavon in that context is probably Lord Craigavon as opposed to the town. Amongst the death notices, Bobby's remembered as a loved husband of Margaret and a loving father of Marnie and Robert, with the notice from the Craigavon Masonic Lodge stating brethren are requested to attend the funeral. A further notice states that the officers and members of the Belfast 11th Branch Amalgamated Engineering Union regret the tragic death of Brother R. Kelly and tender their deepest sympathy. Also buried in the grave, it's hard to read, but you can see on the burial records, it was Robert's wife, Margaret. She died aged 84 in 1994, in other words, 41 years after her husband. If you're going to yawn, Andrew, you need to put your hand over your mouth. Also in Belfast City Cemetery, then this is a photograph of Robert Kelly, and you can see the address there, and this is 47 Wallesley Park. Also in Belfast City Cemetery is Walter Dorling Smiles. So this is Walter Dorling, I've put these in the wrong order, but this is Walter as an older man, and this is him as a young man. And this is his headstone here in the city cemetery. So this is a bit of a close-up. So it says Lieutenant Colonel Sir Walter Dorling Smiles, CBE, DSO, DL, Deputy Lieutenant, Distinguished Service Order, Commander of the British Empire, and MP, lost at sea in Princess Victoria, and in the date, aged 89, it seems to say there. So he was the MP for the constituency in North Down at the time of his death, and he'd received 2 Distinguished Service orders during the Great War, and was recommended for a Victoria Cross on 1 occasion. In peacetime, Sir Walter worked for the Assam Company in India before returning to his homeland, where in 1950 he was elected as a Unionist Member of Parliament for North Down with a 30,274 majority over his Labour opponent. In a press release following his death, In a press release following his death, he was described as, said in the Belfast Telegraph, said, Sir Walter, a man of many interests, and described him as a popular figure in the House. In the same article, Sir Geoffrey Shakespeare said, Sir Walter Smiles contributed to the Empire Parliamentary Delegation to South Africa in 1944 most. He was the Nestor of the party, an old planter with a bluntness of speech and a fund of humour that made a harmonious team out of 8 strong individuals. We could certainly do with Sir Walter now, I think, up at Stormont. Also paying tribute to Sir Walter, the Mayor of Bangor, Alderman Thomas Bailey MP, stated Sir Walter lived to serve, and there were many today who would remember him not merely as an able parliamentarian, but as a man who rejoiced in giving help to those in distress and trouble. It said that if the weather had been better on 31st of January 1953, Sir Walter could have seen his home at Orlock, not far, between Donaghadee and Groomsport. And Walter, so also on this headstone, it's quite hard to read, but these are 2 great uncles here, two brothers of Walter Dorling Smiles, who both died during the Great War. And then this is where Sir Walter's commemorated here. That's what it says there. But those are 3 great uncles of the Chief Scout and prominent TV person, Bear Grylls, so explorer. So those are three great uncles of Bear Grylls, and that's a great uncle, Walter Dorling Smiles. So the next one is in Carnmoney, and this is in the Jewish section of Carnmoney Cemetery. So I was honoured to get into the Jewish section recently, and I suppose thanks to Clive for inadvertently facilitating that, because I spoke at the synagogue, and so then I was able to get into the Carnmoney Jewish Cemetery. And this, you can see the top half of the headstone is in Hebrew, and then below then it commemorates a devoted husband and darling daddy, Samuel Brown, who lost his life in the Princess Victoria disaster, 31st January 1953. May his dear soul rest in peace, and he's ever remembered by his loving wife, family, and relatives. So this is Samuel here with his house. He lived at 526 Antrim Road in Belfast. So that's the house there. He's well known in the clothing trade and was returning from a business trip to Great Britain. His body was recovered and landed in Londonderry by MV Freedor a few days after the disaster. He was associated with the Masonic Order. He was a member of the R.B. Andrews Lodge, a foundation member of the Shalom Lodge, with many brethren attending Brown's funeral, along with a very large attendance of relatives, business and personal friends. A short Belfast Telegraph article states that the services in the house and at the cemetery were conducted by Rabbi Schachner, M.A., whilst the chief mourners were Mr. Joseph Brown, J.P., who was a brother, Messrs. Alan Brown and Alvin Abrahams, who were nephews, and Mr. Harry Abrahams, who's a brother-in-law, and Mr. Sidney Gurwitch, son-in-law. So, particularly, I'm not being sexist, well, I am. Ladies of a certain generation might remember the Gurwitch's big department store in Belfast. You're all looking blankly. Some people, Evelyn, you remember it. It was a big store at Castle Place and Royal Avenue in Belfast. So I think that Samuel Brown had married into the Gurwitches. The next one then is in Carrick Victoria Cemetery, and this is a new plaque. So I think this wasn't here until relatively recently, and you can see it commemorates Jane Hannah, lost in MV Princess Victoria, 31st January 1953, rest in peace. So she was a widow of John, who I believe is also buried in this grave, and he was formerly a station master at Ardmore in County Londonderry, and then latterly at Troopers Lane in Carrick. Jane was actively involved in the Carrickfergus Women's Units Association, and she was still living at Troopers Lane in 1953. She'd been to Glasgow to visit an aunt and had sent her daughter a letter asking her to pick her up from Carrick railway station. So Jane's daughter and children waited at the station, only then to learn of the disaster. So that's Jane. I haven't been able to secure a photograph, but my good friend Ivan Toe, he's related to the family, and he got me this photograph, and this features Isabella Donaghy. She was John's first wife, and she sadly died young. So now we're into, if my mum can see it, you might be able to recognise this big thing at the top here. It's the moat in Dundonald. So this is St Elizabeth's graveyard, where I got married, although I don't want to talk about it. So somebody else is agreeing with me there. So there's on this headstone here, you can see it's basically in the shadow of the moat, and this is the headstone here of the Dewhurst. So you can see all it says on it is Dewhurst, and I first became aware of this when I was leading a tour around the Belfast City Cemetery, and I was talking about Walter Dorling Smiles, and a lady said to me that she's married into the Dewhurst. So then I was able to then piece it together. So it commemorates then this man Frank Dewhurst, and he was a captain and adjutant of the 53rd A Workshop Company, or REME, the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, and he lived at 8 Cherry Hill Drive in Dundonald. He was aged 60 at the time of his death. In his death notice in the Belfast Telegraph, he's commemorated as a deeply regretted by his sorrowing wife Florence, son and daughter-in-law. So that's Frank Dewhurst. So again, you wouldn't get any idea of the fact that he had gone down with the Princess Victoria from that headstone. So the next one then, this is back into the metropolis of Larne, but it's not at it's at the McCabe Cemetery. So that's just to give you some idea. This is the main sweep into the McCabe Cemetery, and more or less the first headstone on the right is this one to James Main, and he's commemorated here. He was drowned, Princess Victoria disaster, 31st January 1953. The headstone is sadly kind of fallen a bit, but it's still visible. This is James here. He was an assistant steward on the Princess Victoria, and he lived at Curran Street in the town. He was originally a carriage builder, and he served during World War II with the Royal Navy and was a holder of the Burma Star. So this photograph is him as a younger man. He was a member of the Larne British Legion, and a death notice stated that the officers and members of MISPA RPB number 88 expressed their deep sympathy to their esteemed member, Sir Knight Thomas Main, JPPM PCGR. I'm not even going to try to guess what but it's quite a good word in Scrabble, quite a good score in Scrabble, on the loss of his son, and to several other members who have suffered bereavement through the sinking of RMS Princess Victoria, and it finished, "Home is the sailor." So a further notice recorded James as missing, younger son of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Main, 35 Barn Hill in Larne, deeply regretted. James's body was washed up on the south coast of the Isle of Man a few days after the disaster. So still in the Larne area, but we've gone to, have you two fallen out? I've just realised. We're down in the metropolis of Island Magee now. So this is Ballypriormore burying ground, one of 3 burying grounds in Island Magee. This commemorates this man, Alexander, known as Sandy McCready. He was aged 61, and he lived at Hillmount in Ballylumford, Island Magee. He's married to Isabella under the son Sandy, also called Sandy. He was employed as a quartermaster on the Princess Victoria's sister ship, Princess Margaret. He was travelling home as a passenger on weekend leave. During World War II, McCready was the quartermaster in the city of Manchester, which was torpedoed off Java. He was then held as a prisoner of war for 3.5 years. A death notice stated, "The Worshipful Master, officers and brethren of Island McGee LOL 1962 regret the death of their esteemed member, brother Alexander McCready, lost on Princess Victoria, and tender sincere sympathy to his wife and family." A further notice from the Marine Bar Dart Club in Whitehead stated that the club wished to tender their deepest sympathies to their fellow member Sandy McCready on the death of his father in the Princess Victoria disaster. So a good bit further away from Island McGee, but don't panic, we're still in County Antrim, is this one. This is the Kirkhill Cemetery at Cales, and that commemorates Anne V.E. Jackson MBE. And she was a senior inspector of domestic science for the Ministry of Education, and she lived at Eglantine Avenue in Belfast. She was returning from a conference in Edinburgh. She was awarded an MBE for her work in 1945. Her body was washed ashore a week after the disaster at Whithorn Bay in Wigtownshire. So you can see that that's recorded in quite a bit of detail here in her headstone. Lost her life as a result of the sinking of the MV Princess Victoria, and whose body was found with Whithorn Bay, Wigtownshire, and interred in this family grave on 10th March 1953. So in other words, about 6 weeks after the disaster. At her funeral, the Reverend Withers stated that Annie was a woman of character and courage, whose personality bound people to her in an unending friendship. So there are a number of unmarked graves to victims of Princess Victoria, particularly in Dundonald Cemetery. But this is one still in County Antrim. This is in Ballymena Cemetery. This is the final resting place, basically here just, of Elizabeth Crawford. She was in her late 40s and married to David. She had 3 daughters and a son, and she lived at 42 Galgorm Street in Ballymena. She was employed as a housekeeper outside the town, and she was returning from a trip to Cairnryan, where she'd been visiting her husband, who was a captain in the Pioneer Corps. So I think it's tragic that there's nothing to commemorate Elizabeth, so when we're talking about 70 years after the disaster, there's somebody that is, there's nothing at her final resting place.
Are there other people in that grave as well? Or is it just her? You don't know?
I don't know, no, but I would imagine so. If she had 4 kids and she was married, I would imagine so. So this is to Drumbraig Cemetery outside Belfast, and for anybody who wants to know how to get to this cemetery, you just go past Sir Thomas and Lady Dixon Park. You come to a bad turn there. There's a lich gate there, and then this is where Drumbraig is. For anybody who would like a drink, it's near the Bob Stewart Spirit Merchant. I'm not looking anywhere in particular here, Eric. So this is John Maynard Sinclair, perhaps one of the 2 most well-known victims of the disaster. He was aged 57 at the time of his death, and he was living at 5 Derrimore Park South in Belfast. He was a Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in the Northern Ireland government. So this is him here, and he was listed as Sir Walter, a man of many interests, a popular figure in the House. He reputedly helped women and children up to the boat deck, an ultimately fruitless task, as mentioned earlier, all women and children perished, as sadly did Major Sinclair. As you can see at the bottom right of the slide, it was the Belfast Telegraph article said that as Minister jumped, he shouted, "My name is Sinclair." So when hearing of his loss, Sinclair's mother-in-law, Christina Claridge, died a number of days later, presumably from a heart attack, adding further trauma to the family. Newspaper reports, following Sinclair's death, stated he was regarded as next Northern Ireland Premier, and he was recorded as an outstandingly successful finance minister and the senior member of the cabinet. Another report stated Major Sinclair brought to his to his supremely important post in the government, unusual powers as a financial authority and as an administrator, placing Northern Ireland's finances on a new footing after the Second World War. So that's Maynard Sinclair. The Maynard Sinclair Pavilion at Stormont is a tangible reminder of the esteem in which Major Sinclair was held. There's also a children's ward at the Ulster Hospital in Dundonald, aimed in his honour, whilst the Major J.M. Sinclair Memorial Pipe Band is further evidence of this esteem. And they are playing down at the McNeil Theatre on Thursday evening of this week as part of the 70th anniversary commemorations. And this is a newspaper clipping from his after his passing, Maynard Sinclair's passing. You can see there's a contingent from 591 Antrim Independent Field Squadron, Royal Engineers, TA, and Major Sinclair was honorary colonel. So a lot further away from Larne, and there's only 4 more to go, is this one. This is in Ringsend Roman Catholic Graveyard, not far, kind of between Garva and Coleraine. And you can see here commemorated Rosemary Mullen, drowned in the Princess Victoria disaster, 31st January 1953, aged 21 years. She was one of 11 children, and she was a student nurse at Warlington Park Hospital in Surrey. She was returning home to see her parents. She'd been a nurse since 1951. She was making the trip in January as she was unable to return home at Christmas due to work commitments. So you do get a lot of people who were sadly victims or survived who were never supposed to be on the ferry. You also get a number of people who, for whatever reason, chose not to go onto it and obviously survived. But sadly, Rosemary Mullen was only on it because she couldn't get the time off at Christmas time. So this is in St Matthew's Roman Catholic graveyard at Drumcerne outside Limavady. This is 29-year-old Frank or Francis Mullen. He was a sergeant in the Royal Irish Fusiliers, having served for 7 years. He was travelling home from his posting in East Africa on compassionate leave to visit his ill mother, who was living at Ballymully at Limavady. And Frank was then to be transferred to serve at the Oma barracks. His family were unaware that he was returning home until they were informed that he was missing. Mullen's body was found along with that of Edmund Freel, who's buried in Dundonald Cemetery, in a Princess Victoria lifeboat which was washed up at Kearney Point near Portaferry 3 days after the sinking of the ship. Requiem Mass was celebrated by the Reverend G. O'Neill from Dungiven, and it followed by a service at the graveside when 2 NCOs, non-commissioned officers, and a bugler from the regimental depot in Oma represented the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers. And the last post and the Reviel were signed Reveille, yes. I meant to say I'd like to throw in a deliberate mistake just to check that Jack's awake, and I'm delighted that he is. So the chief mourners were recorded as Sergeant Mullen's 4 brothers, David, Harry, Bernard and Joseph, and his brother-in-laws Thomas, Guy and Patrick Douglas. So you can see he's commemorated there, lost on MV Princess Victoria, aged 28 years. And hoping I said he was 28. Yeah. Yes, there is a book that's been published recently by some anorak, and there's a photograph of one of these lifeboats that Mullen and Freel had got into. So it's in the book. So sadly, you'll have to buy the book to see the photograph. But yes, so that arguably that makes it worse for the family because he survived the sinking, but perhaps died from exposure. I would imagine because it was as mentioned by the mayor earlier, it was an awful night, weather-wise as well. So this is Francis here, and again that photograph. To thank Stephen for that photograph because it's from his book. This is the penultimate one, and again for Eric that means the one before the last. Oh, happy birthday! I've just remembered. Eric's birthday is today, but so if you want to go up and give him a little kiss afterwards, I'm sure Evelyn wouldn't mind. Evelyn's
birthday is also today.
Oh, is it? Oh, a double celebration?
We're not silly together.
Well, happy birthday, you both. So this is the penultimate one, as Eric now knows. I mean, it was the one before the last, and this is up in Derry City Cemetery. And this commemorates this man, Dudley F. Kipling. So he was a native of Ware in Suffolk, and his full name was Dudley Farnsworth Kipling. He was serving with the 1st contingent from the 7th City of London Battalion when he sustained a gunshot wound to his right thigh in 1915 during the Great War. During the Second World War, he served with the Ulster Home Guard as an intelligence officer. He was a member of Londonderry Rotary Club, and he was a distant relation of Rudyard Kipling. He worked for Welsh Margetson and Company, who were shirt and collar manufacturers from 1906. He transferred to the company's Derry premises in 1939, and at the time of his death, he was returning from a business trip to England. He was the joint local director of the company. His fellow director, A.R. Larne, had safely returned from the same business trip via Heysham on the Friday night, so he survived, and yet Kipling passed away, who was his equivalent post. Also commemorated on the headstone is, it's very, very hard to read, is his son, Dudley Kipling Jr. He enlisted with the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers, but subsequently joined an officer cadet training unit in India. He was attached to the 1st Battalion West Yorkshire Regiment with the rank of lieutenant when he was killed in action on 6th April 1945, aged 21, and is buried in Tukhayan War Cemetery in Myanmar or Burma. At the time of his death, the family home was at the Caw Villa, Cluny Road in Londonderry. So that's Dudley Kipling Jr. is commemorated there, but he's not actually buried there, he's buried out in Burma. The last one then is, this is down in Enniskillen. So you can see this is a clipping from the newspapers, and I remember it's David Galanders, only son of Samuel and Sarah Galanders, and it says at the funeral from Belfast to Braindrum Cemetery in Enniskillen. It arrives at approximately 3 o'clock. He was a civil servant living in Benton, Northumberland. He was aged 26 years old, and he was travelling to his family home at Charnville, Enniskillen, to visit his mother. So that's the furthest one away from Larne, the centre of the universe, after Killyleagh. So that's this is the closer up one of his headstone, and again it doesn't mention he died as a result of the Princess Victoria. It just says he was called home suddenly, 31st January 1953, aged 27 years. I think I said 26, but he's 27. So I'll just finish with this great photograph. Yesterday I was lucky enough to go down to Donaghadee to see their excellent exhibition down there that Shirley and her colleagues have pulled together. And with the connection to the Sir Samuel Kelly lifeboat being a very strong one. And I saw on their excellent display board this guy's name, but I forgot to it's on my phone. But this is a survivor of the Princess Victoria, and you can see he's getting some unconventional kind of assistance now, changed time. So I suppose if he survived the horror of the Princess Victoria, I suppose he deserved a cigarette. Not that I condone, I'm conscious of my daughters in the back row, and my mum more importantly. So not that I have ever smoked anything of any interest in my life. That's all, folks. Thanks very much. I will just, so I'll mention a few things now, if I can. So it's good that 70 years after the disaster, at least there is a bit of awareness of the disaster, thanks to the likes of Shirley, etc., and her sterling efforts. So this is an article in, well, I'll mention Shirley's one first. This is the Newton Ards Chronicle, So this is a 4-page spread just commemorating the Sir Samuel Kelly and the Sir Samuel Kelly lifeboat piloted by Shirley's dad, her grandfather with her dad on board as well, Hugh Nelson. They picked up the majority of the survivors, and so there's a little bit about the plans that are ongoing in Donaghadee for the restoration. Well, the partial restoration of the Sir Samuel Kelly. This is an article yesterday in the Sunday Life, which features a local anorak there promoting his book, but it says commemorates the lost souls of the Princess Victoria, and then under. So this is the Sir Samuel Kelly Princess Victoria disaster leaflet as well, and also Justin managed to secure this publication, The Loss of Princess Victoria by Jack Hunter, who's a member of the Stranraer and District Local History Trust. And interestingly, just completely coincidentally, on the back cover is more or less the same image of that raft floating there. So, but the last one I want to mention is David's excellent programme. I have to say that because he hadn't paid me yet. Excellent programme of events to commemorate the 70th anniversary for those in peril in the sea. Commemoration of the 70th anniversary of MV Princess Victoria disaster of 1953. So as well as this talk, then tomorrow at 11 are you going to mention this? No? Tomorrow at 11 o'clock, then down at the Princess Victoria Memorial, there's a commemoration on the promenade, as well as the launch of the Princess Victoria exhibition. So I had a sneaky peek downstairs, sorry, and it's really, really interesting, as was the Sir Samuel Kelly's one as well. And then also yesterday was brought, I know that's why I said was, yeah, so yesterday was broadcast. There was a number of articles on Radio Ulster, but there was a special service recorded at the First Larne Presbyterian and broadcast yesterday. So I'm sure if you're interested, you can get it in iPlayer. And then on Thursday, as I mentioned earlier, then there's the concert down at the McNeil Theatre. That's Thursday, the 2nd of February, 7:30. So. And it's to raise money for the Mayor's charities. Tickets are still available.
Tickets are through Eventbrite, so you need to go into Eventbrite.
Okay.
Eventbrite.co.uk.
And I suppose, whilst I'm conscious that it's coming up to the hour, I do have copies of my other books here. Who'd have thought it? So I'll mention those very quickly. Lock the doors. Oh, they're already locked, right, okay. This is my first book. Again, I have to thank Thomas and Clive for pulling all of these together. The first book is about Belfast City Cemetery. 35 different themed trails. So there's a woman's trail, there's a sportsperson's trail, there's a World War I, World War II trail, etc. C.S. Lewis trail. This is Dundonald Cemetery. I got a bit carried away with this one, so it's a bit of a monster. Apologies, Thomas. Thomas and I fell out as a direct result of this. So I'm from Dundonald, and it's a very interesting cemetery. This is my third book. This is called 2020. Can anybody at the back think when this came out? Stuart, can you guess when it came out? It wasn't 2020, that's right. It's 2021. If anybody didn't notice, 2020 was a little bit of an unusual year. So this is 20 graves in each of 20 different local cemeteries. So Derry City Cemetery's in it, where Ryan McBride, for any football fans in the room, he's buried there. John Hume, Cecil Francis Alexander, who wrote There's Once in Royal David City, There's a Green Hill Far Away, etc. Carnmoney, Alex Higgins, Larne and McCabe are both buried there. There's 3 different graveyards in Bangor. There's also Movilla Cemetery, where Blair Main, etc. Audley Patterson. There's a programme about Audley Patterson tonight. they're both buried in Movilla, so they both feature in that book. Pardon?
Victoria Cemetery.
Oh yes, yes. Sorry for my omission of not mentioning the metropolis of Carrick. Of course, it was a bigger place than Belfast before we saw sense. And but it also has in the back cover of the 2020 book is little sketches of some of the people who feature. So Royal Friars, who you'll know, Frank Pantridge, the man who invented the defibrillator, Alex Higgins, as I say, and also Sam Cree. So Sam Cree, he's buried in Blaris Cemetery outside Lisburn. So a little story about Sam Cree was he died quite young. He was only 53, same age as me, and he wasn't well just before he died. He was in hospital, and a friend went to visit him and said, "Not too good. I've got 1 foot in the grate." And the visitor said, "Don't you mean grave?" He says, "No, I want to be cremated." So the fourth book then is Roselawn, and this is my gran and granddad on their wedding day, and then that's their grave on the back. And then this is the most recent one. This came out on, well, it was officially launched on Saturday. So this is 50 footballers. Anybody guess what this is about?
Soccer players.
Soccer players, that's right. The beautiful game. So these, yeah, wrong type of football. So it's 50 footballers. So on the front cover there are like 1 to 12. So there's obvious ones like George Best in it, but also buried in the town cemetery here in Larne is Bertie Fulton. He was a Belfast Celtic legend, and so he features, as well as a guy who died on Frank Gardner, who was playing for Larne when he died. That's just over a century ago now. So thankfully, Larne FC did put have put a few wreaths at his final resting place. So those 50 footballers. So plans are afoot for 50 footballers too. So yes, that's all the shameless plugs. Oh, the bigger books are the thicker books are £15, and the other ones, the cheaper ones, the slightly smaller ones are tenner. And if you buy them, it comes with a completely 100% cure for insomnia. So.
Don't forget the autograph.
Oh yes, and if you want me to autograph them, you can get them for $9.99.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.